Hello, and welcome to the program. This is the Black Ponder. I'm your host, Neil Trotter, and today we are in my, I guess this is a home gym, sort of, kind of, but also serves other purposes. Actually, let's see here. Yeah, that's a cage where this is my wife's rats, and she's likes her rats, and that's great. And she's also a personal trainer, so she got her library of books on personal training there. And sometimes I'm here with the kettlebell, doing the workouts here. It's a multi-purpose room, but I thought it would be a nice setting. Well, first of all, it's really cold, and it's really warm in here, and we got the natural light, and it is what it is. This is the most convenient room for this particular situation that I'm in, and that's how we roll in the Black Ponder. You may hear random noises from time to time from various sources, but hey, we're lo-fi here at the Black Ponder. If you're new, you'll find that out. If you're old, been seeing my videos for a while, that's just how we roll. So today, what we're going to be talking about, actually, we're going to be continuing our series on, the series that I call, why is the Black Ponder called the Black Ponder? Like, black. B-L-A-C-K. Right? What's up with that? Why you gotta add the race to the whole thing? This is a philosophy channel. Why you add race to the whole, we need to cleanse philosophy from issues of race, and it makes me feel uncomfortable. I wish you would get rid of that. And I still get those comments, suggestions to this day. And this series has been going for a long time, and I'm not going to stop calling myself the Black Ponder. And I'm going to try and use these videos as a reason to explain why. As a way to explain why. And we're going to do that via this book right here. It's a great book. It's called, that's better. Running While Black. It's from Alison, Mariella, Désir. Before we get into the book, it's a great book. I might be a little biased because I am a runner. Sometimes I post my runs on the channel. It's just something I do just for the fun of it. Honestly, I enjoy it, and I'm black, so there's a little bias there. But it's got some great philosophy, and I wouldn't feature it in this channel if it did not have some really great philosophical themes. And I was reading it, I'm like, ooh, this will be some great topics to discuss that are mentioned in this book. And so there's a lot of stuff mentioned in this book, lots of themes, lots of topics. So my videos, they're never like book summaries, they're not like book reports, they're not even book reviews. I call them discourses because I just use books as a way to start a discussion, a philosophical discussion. And I pick themes that are mentioned in books and topics that I feel like, wow, the author really did a good job explaining these themes, and I use them as springboards to further critical discussion. And I thought this book would do a great job furthering my discussion on this channel about why do I call myself the Black Ponder instead of just the Ponder. So I want to start by just saying I guess kind of revealing a little bit more about me, who, maybe a pet peeve I have. Pet peeve, a little irritation I have. I don't really like when people use the term SJW, social justice warrior, as a negative, as an insult, as something that's derogatory. It really kind of irritates me when people, oh, you're just SJW. Like, really? So I'm about social justice. I'm about treating people of all backgrounds and circumstances fairly, like that's bad, right? Like that, it just really riles me up. Now I understand the point of, I get like the critique. It's like, well, SJWs, they're not really about fighting for social justice. What they're really doing is virtue signaling, which is another term I really despise, honestly. This idea like, they're just going on top of their soapbox and they're just saying things. And they don't really mean what they say. They're just doing it for either like profit gain, just selling some product, or, just trying to feel good about themselves. But they don't really have any substance. And I find more often than not that is not the case. Honestly, I find that even from white people who are, try to do the social justice angle. Like, yeah, there's some that are doing that. They're just like salesmen or cons people, but for the most part, like, people really legitimately see the world is very unfair, and it's based off of social factors like race, like gender, like sexuality, like all types of other, factors that are social economic, and they want to make a change, and I think that's good. So when, I don't like when people use that term negatively, social justice warrior, as if it's a bad thing, because really to me it's like, well, you're basically saying kindness is bad. You're saying compassion is bad. And, it just gives license to be a jerk. And often it is the case like when people start going along those terms and they start using SJW as like an insult, they start sounding like a jerk. They start sounding like, like they start promoting kind of asshole way of some acting. And I just want to push back against that. So I want to get into a philosophical discussion about what is social justice? How can we talk about social justice in a philosophical way? What is the philosophy of social justice? And I think this book does a great job at highlighting some philosophy of social justice. That's what we're going to talk about here. So this author, Alison Mariella Désir, she is many things, like a social activist and an athlete. I mean, just a very multi-faceted, talented professional. I didn't know much about the person, but now I know a lot about her. And one of the things that she's done is she's created this extraordinary running group. Actually, it's not just a group. It's a movement. Really, it's it's a social justice movement, right? But it started out as a running group, but it focuses on being inclusive, allowing people to feel comfortable getting into the hobby of running. Whatever background they are, whatever skill level, and it's called Harlem Run. And this this movement eventually got very popular, large membership, and she started getting invited to conventions, right? Athletic conventions, running conventions, all types of affairs and conferences. So I want to share with you this quote from one of her visits to a conference. This is actually from the chapter called Purpose, which is, hey, purpose, that's philosophy. What chapter? Chapter 9. She's talking to another person who's really active in the running community, and particularly like inclusivity and social justice, the interconnection between social justice and athleticism, particularly running. So she's talking to this person, and I'll just read you the quote. This is page 106, just in case you got the book, because I know people, sometimes they ask, like, could you please give me the page number? So let me give you the page number. This is 106. This is at the top. And, so I'll just talk to this person, this professional athletic person, and she's saying, she told me about a program in Philadelphia that uses cycling to aid women transitioning from prison to civilian life. The women are getting fit, she said, but they're also getting access to reliable transportation, addiction treatment, life skill classes, and social support they otherwise would not have access to. The program was a form of social justice. The view that everyone deserves equal economic, social, and political rights and privileges. The goal of social justice work is to open the doors of access and opportunity for everyone, particularly those in greatest need. So that's the goal. So what is social justice? I'll repeat. It is the work to open the doors of access and opportunity for everyone, particularly those in the greatest need. Okay, that's what social justice is. It isn't like grandstanding. It isn't virtue signaling. I know the critique is the problem with social justice warriors is that they don't do that. They don't do that kind of thing. But I feel like this kind of work is pushed to the sides, right? Even when you try and attempt to do it, people will dismiss you as a social justice warrior. That's a problem. But I'll continue. I skipped a paragraph here, and that conversation got the author reflecting on her group and what she's doing. Harlem Run is, and the members in her group. And so now the author is talking about, I'm thinking about the members in my group, and she's talking about one here. One woman struggled with her weight and body image all her life and really wanted to be thin. But once she started running, she experienced the power of her body. Running opened her eyes to the truth that her body was so much more than its form, and her focus became what her body could do, where it could take her. She was able to confidently reject that lie that patriarchy had fed her and create her own narrative. Okay? That's very important here. This is what social justice does. All right? It's enabling. So this member of her group, this running group, it allowed her to reject what was holding her back, body image issues, and she was able to create her own narrative by empowering her. Okay, that's important. Okay, but I'll continue. Another woman had been in an unhappy marriage for 20 years. So this is another member. She stayed because she didn't have a vision of what a different life could look like. Being in the shadow of her partner was the only role she knew. Once she began running with us, she found that there was so much more to her and that she could create a new life. Okay, this is social justice in action. All right, let me skip down a few lines. We're at the end of page 106. Other people changed careers, ate healthier, lowered their blood pressure, and found confidence and a sense of self. Harlem Run was sending a message. I could transform into a better version of myself. These personal transformations were part of the larger work of social justice. Black people at Harlem Run were accessing opportunities to move and create that were historically not available in their neighborhood, defying the statistics you often hear about, higher rates of obesity, heart disease, and hypertension in white people. That's actually a thing. Okay, daily hypervigilance due to racism and microaggressions is one reason for higher disease rates and increased stress levels in Black people, which lead to premature biological aging, a phenomenon known in the medical world as weathering. Okay, this is a real thing. Each person transformation over time would help address health disparities in New York City by changing the neighborhood's health statistics and those of Black people at large. By providing access to free activity that reduces stress and improves health, Harlem Run was helping manage the toll of discrimination. And in the same act of running as Black people, we were showing that the Harlem community that distance running was for us. Okay, there's two things, right, that are going on here. I mean, there's a lot of things, but two major things that I want to focus on. Social justice there's two things about it. There's empowering people to transform themselves into better versions of themselves. And it also allows them to be included in activities which transforms them into better versions of themselves. Okay, it's empowering, and it is an action of inclusion. An action of inclusion is very important, because if you've been watching my videos over the years, we focus on this concept of interrelation or interdependence, right? We're all connected with each other, right? We're more interconnected, interrelated than we are independent and separate from each other, right? So much so we don't even realize it. So by including each other and allowing each other to grow in that inclusion helps us all grow. This is the work of social justice. But let me continue. We're breaking down social justice. I'm skipping just 3 lines here. We're on page 107 now. This is the 3rd line of the second section of that page. Traditional counseling views the therapist as a change agent only within the walls of the counseling room. Okay, she's talking about therapy. She kind of transitions to like a different context, but she's talking about the same thing. So we're talking about therapy now, but it's the same concept. While a social justice approach sees the therapist as a change agent both inside the counseling room and out in the larger world. Okay, it's not just about the inner world, right? There's also the outer world that is influencing you as well. And social justice is conscious of that. Okay, but I'll continue. As an advocate for changing rules, laws, and conditions that impact clients' lives, a social justice approach asks, what are the conditions in the world that contribute to my clients' mental health symptoms, such as racism, food insecurity, and sexism? And how can I, as a therapist, work to resist and dismantle those conditions in order to help my client? Okay, I'll do that. Let me repeat that. What are the conditions in the world that contribute to my client's mental health symptoms? The conditions in the world, which are oftentimes outside of our control, but have major influences on our mental health and all other aspects of our health, for that matter. Physical, spiritual, emotional, things like racism, food insecurity, sexism. These things affect us, right? And it affects some people more than others. Black people more than white people. Women more than men. It affects us all, but the degrees are different, right? This is what social justice acknowledges and tries to work toward fixing. But let me continue reading. This approach made it clear to me that it was my job to push back against oppressive systems. And I read that, I'm like, amen, system, right? And that's why I call myself the Black Ponder. I call this channel the Black Ponder. Because in a way, I'm pushing back against the Western philosophy supremacist idea. Not like, I'm not rejecting Western philosophy or, the well-known staples of philosophy. Aristotle, Plato, Descartes, and then you go to like Kant and Hegel. I have many videos about those philosophers. And, all the old white men, right? They're very important. They're very important. You can learn a lot from them. But they're not the end-all, be-all. And the fact that, in the world of philosophy, we treat it that way is a detriment, right? Because it oppresses all of us, but it oppresses Black people, right, more than others, or people of color that I would say more than others, right? I'm just trying, I'm trying to be inclusive, much like the author here, Désir, much like she's doing with the running. But let's talk about that more in depth with another quote, right? So in this book, this book is about many things. I would encourage you to, check it out, look for it maybe in a bookstore or something like that. because it just goes over so many things, things that I'm not going to be able to explain in one video. But one of the great things about it is that it's a history lesson. She goes into a lot of historical research and scholarship about the foundations of the sport of running. And during her time of doing that, she discovers that, you know, black people were essential at starting, creating, developing the sport of running. So I'm going to start here on page 141, and this is the third paragraph. I learned that the Pioneer Club, and the Pioneer Club is this early club started by African Americans, black people, that were professional, high-level, high-class, record-holding runners, right? So the Pioneer Club was a civil rights organization as much as it was an athletic one. That's important. So it's two things at the same time. A civil rights organization as much as it was an athletic one. So it wasn't just about, it was as much about running as it was about civil rights organizing. Why? I'll keep explaining. I'll keep reading. Its mere existence as an integrated club hosting integrated meets, you know, racial integration, challenged the status quo of segregation, right? You know, we live in a time, maybe it's not so hard to believe, you know, because unfortunately, you know, racial hatred is on the up and rise, or maybe it's not so much on the rise, but it is like more apparent nowadays. But some people may still be shocked to know, like, you know, just seeing black people and white people together, it's a shock. you know, it breaks some people's brains, right? It just by doing that alone, you open people's minds, right? Even that is an act of social justice, right? Or civil rights organization. I would push and say, like, just calling this channel the Black Ponder, philosophy as told through the perspective of a black American. Even that is a form of social justice. Or, you know, maybe in a sense, a social justice warrior just by the very fact of doing that, just by saying the term black, using that term. How so? It's not so much that, you know, oh, black person talk about philosophy. Wow, that's weird. You know, that's not my thing that I like to focus on. Although, you know, some people do comment. They're like, wow, finally a black person talking about philosophy for a change. And I'm not against that because, yeah, that's the thing we should encourage, right? But I'm just more, I'm more focused on, like, okay, I have this perspective that, you know, honestly, a lot of white people just don't have. And it doesn't, you know, I'm not saying I'm, you know, there's some sort of superiority or I'm better. It's just my perspective is quite different because of my blackness. You know, the way society has treated me, right, throughout the years of my life. So I have this perspective, so I can read philosophy, incorporating this social economic perspective, and offer insights that are minority insights, that are not pushed, that are not you know, focused on, but are also very important. You know, insights that are overlooked, pushed aside, not discussed, but are critical. That's what's important. But let me continue with the quote. I'm on page 143 now. This is the third paragraph. I was floored by this. We were not only there, and she's talking about the Pioneer Club, you know, founded, organized, created the foundations of running by African Americans that were at peak athletic condition, setting, you know, records. So she said we were not only there, we helped build the sport, but our participation had been erased, buried. While the New York Road Runners, the RRCA, and the sport as a whole evolved into a white sport, it was clear to me now that the running story is not only a white story. It is a black story. It is a civil rights story. It is a story of our talent and resilience. It is a story of creating space for Black people. The idea of an inclusive distance running culture, the democratic, anybody can run ideal running wants to be, traces its roots to 1942 with 3 Black men who embraced and fought for integration and inclusion. Said simply, the first chapter of the modern running boom began with Black men in Harlem. And that's important to understand, right? Because the stereotypical, and it's not even like stereotype, right? It's just the mainstream perception of running. You know, you think of somebody who's a runner. Just put like marathon runner in Pinterest or Tumblr or Google or whatever. You're gonna see probably a very skinny white guy, just running, primarily like, a white sport dominated by white people, probably started by white people. So you get this misconception like, that's a sport that was started by a particular type of person of a particular type of community. But that's a misconception, and it's important. It's important to understand that, because what happens is you get an incorrect understanding of the thing as it actually is, right? And that's the philosophy right there. The thing in and of itself, and the thing as it is experienced. The thing as it is experienced is not actually what the thing is. You are missing out, and you're getting this incorrect interpretation of what the thing is, running in this instance. So if you're an African American or a person of color in many parts of the world, and you see the sport of long distance running, you're like, that's probably not for me. That I don't really feel like that's something I should be involved, because the perception is, what you see, what's presented to you is these images of really thin white guys, but also, it could be quite expensive. You gotta buy really expensive shoes. You might not have money for that. The athletic clothing can be outside your cost range, depending on, your socioeconomic background. And you might feel like, okay, that's not really for me. But the reality is, people of color were the foundation of the sport. It's quite similar to philosophy, where you look at philosophy and you're like, okay, it's just, Hegel, Kant, Plato, you see the images of these people and it's like, wow, there's not a lot of people that look like me. But it's not only that, right? It's not only that, it's what they're talking about as well, and who they're talking to and who they're not talking to, right? And because, I know, as I presented in many of my videos, Hegel, who's a person that I'm a huge fan of his work, but he writes whole chapters of how Africa has no history. The people of the East, they are not quite as developed as Europe, so we're not gonna really talk about them. And so you get this perception like, oh, okay, so the real philosophy comes from Europe, or Europeans invented philosophy, where that's just simply not true, right? There's many great, amazing ideas, philosophical concepts originating from parts of Africa, parts of Asia that are completely erased, ignored, just dismissed, absolutely. That are quite different from continental philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, medieval philosophy, and we're missing out. And what about even like contemporary philosophy, right? Current thinkers that are like people of color, which I like to talk about and include on this channel as well. They're just completely sidelined. Like, oh, okay, they're not really an actual philosopher because they're not quoting Hegel or something like that. Where they have really great ideas that I would put on the same level, right? Yeah, that's right. As I do often, not just people of color, women as well, and women of color, right? And so when I call myself the Black Ponder, I'm trying to put that in the forefront. But let me continue this quote here. This is page 144. I begin on the second paragraph. History was told through a white lens from the perspective of those in power. How much the course of history might have changed if black people had been rightfully included. Okay, she's talking about running. I'm talking about philosophy. I often have conversations with people about, like, where's the black philosophy? Where's the philosophy from, like, nations of Africa? And it's like, they're there. It's just we don't want to, we as a society have chosen to completely disacknowledge them and just erase them. But how much richer would the field of philosophy be if we included those ideas? And here she says, how might running have evolved differently? Right? If we knew we were there from the beginning, would I and millions of other black people have turned to running sooner? Would I have seen myself in the sport? Because she shares in the book also about her experience long distance running and how she eventually excelled in, like, short distance running, the 400 meter, the 200 meter dash, that kind of stuff, because that's more considered like a black thing. Right? I know all about that. I actually, when I was in high school, I was a member of the cross country team, but it was considered, cross country was considered kind of a white sport. Right? And so as I advanced and went to the regionals, there were more and more white people who were like, didn't make me feel as comfortable as I would have liked. So I was like, I'm out of here. This sport is too white for me. You might say, like, well, that was your issue, not like, you could have been there. Why didn't you just stick it out? Also the white people who were cross country, who I was with, were saying like, hey, maybe you might want to try basketball, or maybe the short distance might be more your body type is more suited for, those kind of comments. And let's not pretend that type of commentary doesn't happen, right? We all know that kind of stuff happens all the time, even today, right? The year 2022 going on 2023, but particularly when I was little, the late 90s, people were all about that, but people still are to this day. But she's saying, like, well, what if we knew the truth that, oh no, actually black people were at the foundation of long distance running, so this is not just a white thing. Right? I would shift that over to philosophy. If we acknowledged more black thinkers or people of color who do have deep philosophical insight, and they do exist, right? It's just society has deemed them unworthy, and therefore they don't exist, quote unquote, but they do. If we saw that more and more, how many more people of color would, and not just people of color, as women, or people on the queer spectrum, all different kinds of people, right, would be included in philosophy. And how much more ideas would we have to be working with and to, like, critically discuss it, like, and talk about it in terms of, like, where are we going, who we are, what is life, what is the being, all these diverse opinions and critical thinking, and that's really what I want to get to when we talk about social justice. This is why social justice is important, because inclusivity is important, because it helps us all. But let me continue here. I'm reading the quote. This is page 145. This is the third line at the end. It was our responsibility to correct history, to let people know we have always been part of distance running. That's the work of social justice, which she's greatly doing here in this work. She outlines a lot of black history, which is also the history of running as a sport. And so what I like to propose, or like I want to say, is by calling myself the Black Ponder, I hope to dismiss this idea about, like, well, Europe is the inventor of philosophy, which is no, right? Or like, well, there wasn't too much philosophical thought happening in Africa during, like, ancient Greek times. You damn well better believe there was, but we want to just focus on ancient Greek philosophy and that's it. And I would even put it forward in the year, in today's time, the time of now. There's a lot of people of color, queer people, non-binary people, women that have some amazing, tremendous ideas that we can learn from and become better. But a lot of those ideas are deemed social justice warrior. They are categorized as virtue signaling. They are put in this CRT thing, critical race theory. They're just nullified, negated, just erased without even critically thinking about it, which is sad. It's hurting everybody. So when I call myself the Black Ponder, when I call this channel the Black Ponder, I'm saying no to that nullification. And so that nullification, it is a problem. It is a problem because, like I'm saying, all these ideas that are just ignored. And there's a lot of them I feature on this channel, which a lot of people, I often get comments where it's like, oh, don't talk about that. Feminism, social activists, current affairs videos that I do. It's not like I don't put those up. I do. But people are like, oh, don't talk about that. I want to see more, quote unquote, real philosophy, right? But that is a very limited, narrow way of thinking. I feature a lot of traditional Western philosophy, right? That's actually most of what I put, right? So it's not like I have an agenda against that. I'm just saying let's include other ideas that are also very helpful. But when we dismiss those, then we're dismissing the help. Right? It's a problem. Let me read you this quote. It's on page 184. It is the end of the 8th line on the 3rd paragraph. And she's talking about, the context here is running, the sport of running. But we can easily put this on many other categories, like philosophy. Running ignores race in the same way the nation does, like the sport of running. Running is for everybody. It doesn't matter your race, right? But the reality is that in the current state of affairs, race does impact your ability to run. It's not all about how much effort the individual puts in. The social economics plays a huge factor as well. So she's saying running ignores race in the same way the nation does. America, the United States of America. It pretends that there is no divide, no race problem. It pretends to be colorblind. That's what I feel like when people are like, don't call yourself the Black Ponder. The philosophy is pure. I've been told this numerous times. Philosophy is pure, right? It's clean of race. Race didn't even exist in the time of Plato, which, the concept of race as we know it, that's true. That's true. But when we take Plato to the world of today, where race is this huge factor in life, right? We have to factor that into the function of Plato's philosophical ideas, right? Because if we're applying them to the world of today, then we have to factor in all the rest of the world's circumstances. Running believes it is a sport that welcomes everyone, when it remains a sport that primarily prioritizes, celebrates white experiences while having no clue that there are other experiences, right? It sounds familiar. It sounds like philosophy to me. And let me read you this quote on page 209. This is the 3rd paragraph, 3rd line. White ignorance is part of what keeps a white supremacist system in place. If we don't acknowledge it exists, then there's nothing to address. White supremacy is a system that allows racism to flourish, and it prevents racial diversity from being welcomed and celebrated. I often think of this quote from the hip-hop artist Guante. White supremacy is not a shark, it is the water. This idea of racism doesn't really exist, right? I think I had a conversation on Facebook a week ago where somebody was literally saying like, there's just no philosophy that comes from Africa. This enormous continent, right, that has all these ideas. And to think that is racist, right? But it's white ignorance is what it is, which is racist, which is not a moral attack. It's not like I'm saying you're a bad person. It's a kind of ignorance, which that's what racism in large part is it can be a moral failing. It also oftentimes has nothing to do with morality. It's just a factor of ignorance. Right? And, philosophy is all about getting rid of that, becoming less ignorant, enlightening yourself through studying ideas. And the more diverse your input of ideas, the more enlightened you become. That's not to say you should accept all ideas, but to just, intake them, kind of use your filter, your critical thinking filter, and at least receive them, right? If you're in this world where it's all about Western philosophy or European philosophy or medieval philosophy, and that's my wheelhouse, which is fine. It's good to have wheelhouses and lanes, but to just be like, we're just not going to talk about that, anything else. It's like, well, you're just missing out, right? You're completely like. Your idea of life is very limited, and how can we move forward as a species with just being in one lane? Listen to this quote. This is 234 page number, and this is the end. This is the very last line. When I hear white runners say, "Keep politics out of running," or that running publications and brands should stick to running, and that race and social issues don't belong in running, I hear someone denying structural racism, bias, and white supremacy, denying my reality and the reality of millions of others. These comments demonstrate a lack of racial understanding and a narrow view of our nation's history. And they ignore the fact that running occurs outdoors, in neighborhoods and parks, and on streets and trails. They ignore the fact that politics and racism are embedded in everything, all aspects of American life. I feel it. I feel it as a runner. We could just talk about, the running aspects of that. But, this is a philosophy channel. So I get those comments about philosophy. Keep politics out. That's another thing I constantly get messaged. Why are you talking about politics? First of all, there's a whole field of philosophy, political philosophy, and some of the great philosophers, Aristotle included, wrote massive texts on the subject, right? But on top of that, so it's politics, race. Don't bring race in. Get rid of that black into your YouTube name. That makes me so uncomfortable that you put that title there. I wish you wouldn't put that title there. Just stick to philosophy. Let's not talk about current affairs. It's like, so it's basically, you don't want to talk about the real world. You don't want to talk about like the problems that are actually affecting human beings, right? That's where you just want to live in this world of abstraction, right? That's not even like abstracting reality. Is abstracting a kind of like fantasy, the world that has been created, excluding so much other stuff. And is that really philosophy? Yeah, it is a kind of, it's bad philosophy. it's bad philosophy, I would say. So let's not be that dismissive, and frankly, let's not be that immature. Let's be more inclusive with our philosophy. And that way we could be more progressive, in the sense, not like the whole demonization of the word progressive, like, oh, you're a progressive. No, I'm saying like progressive, like actually moving forward, making progress, right? That kind of progression. Instead of just like thinking we all exist in like Hegel's inverted world, right? This abstract concept, which is is quite an interesting and applicable idea, but I mean, the reality is more than just that limited philosophical concept. Let me end with this quote. This is page 243, third paragraph. Learning and unlearning our history is a necessary part of decentering whiteness and widening the circle of inclusion. History is living and breathing in the present. It does not just explain the past, it sets the future. It sets the future. That's what history does. Hegel talks about this, which I go into major depth. So it's not, this is like some radical far left idea. Okay. This is an idea that's well established in continental philosophy. History sets the future. What we choose to remember, memorialize, and preserve as a society determines how we understand our present and imagine our future, wrote the curators of an exhibit on the murder of Emmett Till at the National Museum of American History. Let's give credit where credit is due. Very important event in the history of the United States. When black history is suppressed or delegitimized, we lose the ability to reckon with systemic racism from one generation to the next. Yes, so, that's basically gives a nice bow tie to what my point is with bringing up this text and a theme that was brought up here, running while black. Why isn't it just called running? Right? Well, because there's an issue in the sport of running and in the United States of America overall, right? And being black, this author here, right, Alison, Mariella, Désir, is a huge part of the issue that she, and not only is she dealing with, but other people of color, women of color, men of color be included, but just the country overall in the sport of running. And I would just extend that to the field of philosophy, where it's like, okay, you're only gonna be concerned about continental philosophy. All we really care about is ancient Greek philosophy. That's it. Because when that happens, there's this misconception where it's like, oh, that's all there is. And those are the greatest ideas in the world. And then there's these other really spectacular great ideas that are not even considered. That they're so not considered, people don't even realize that they exist. By calling this channel The Black Ponderer, I want to push this idea that, okay, there is other kinds of philosophies, other categories of philosophies that are very important, and we need to consider them. I understand the idea, look, man, I got a degree in continental philosophy, Western philosophy, medieval philosophy. That's my wheelhouse. That's my area of expertise. I'm not trying to, go into some other field of philosophy. I don't know anything about that. I'm not equipped enough to study it. Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. You can pick up a book and just start reading it. You can read some philosophy from the Middle East. That's fine. Some Islamic philosophy, and you got a PhD in Kantian philosophy or Hegelian philosophy. You can it's not too difficult to find a nice translation of an Islamic text or a text from China that's talking about some Buddhist philosophy. It might be very enriching for you. It probably will. It doesn't take too much. And it's not to say that, you're not trying to be an expert in it. You just want to consider it. Just diversify is what I'm saying. And that's really a huge part of this channel, is to, acknowledge the diversity of ideas. And, also show there's a problem here in philosophy. The fact that we're not as inclusive with ideas. Philosophy is in this rut. And then as a result, you get these I would say, pop philosophers dominating the field and pushing these ideas that are very detrimental, very misogynistic, very racist, white supremacist, patriarchal, You start, those ideas begin to emerge because they're like rooted in this superiority complex of, philosophy was invented in Europe, right? And, these are the dominant ideas written by men, only for men, and they're of the service of that particular group. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. So, as I continue to call this channel The Black Ponder, I would like you to consider, if you read that title and you're disturbed, or you're like upset, or you're just like, what the hell's going on there? Think about it. Think about maybe I should look up what's some philosophy in Africa. Africa's a big ass continent, by the way. There are many countries in Africa, many diverse ideas in that continent. Asia's another one. How about the early Americas, like pre-colonialism? The indigenous people of Americas, they have lots of ideas, right, that are very fruitful. And, a lot of those ideas we could incorporate today that could address the issues that we're dealing with in terms of climate change or environmentalism. Don't just get stuck in your own wheelhouse. That's all I'm saying. But in any case, I would like to thank you for watching The Black Ponder. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.